He laughed when she represented herself. He fell apart minutes later.
The courtroom fell silent when she said it. Layla Vane stood alone behind the defense table in King County Superior Court, Seattle. Her suit was slightly outdated. She hadn't worn formal clothes in years. Her hands trembled as she gripped a manila folder against her chest. Across the aisle, Caspian Montgomery sat surrounded by a wall of legal talent. 3 associates, 2 paralegals, and at the center, Alastair Davis, the kind of divorce attorney other attorneys warned their clients about. The kind who didn't just win cases, he buried people. Caspian leaned toward Alastair and whispered something. Both men laughed. Not quietly, not politely. The kind of laugh that echoed off marble walls and made the court reporter look up from her machine. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Montgomery, I need to confirm for the record you've dismissed your public defender. Do you have alternative representation?" Layla's voice came out steadier than her hands. "No, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself." The laugh that erupted from Caspian's side of the room was loud enough to make the bailiff shift his weight. Caspian didn't even try to hide it. He looked at his attorney, shook his head, and laughed like a man who'd just been told a joke at a party. Some of the gallery exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman in the back row pressed her lips together and looked away. But Layla didn't flinch. She stood there, folder pressed to her chest, watching her husband laugh at her. 9 years. 9 years of rehearsing this moment in silence, of swallowing words, of waiting. The laugh would cost him everything, but he didn't know that yet. No one did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why Caspian Montgomery laughed that day, and why that laugh would become the most expensive sound he ever made, you need to know how Layla Vane became invisible. Her name was Layla Vane, 41 years old, mother of 2, and for the past 9 years, the woman the world knew only as Mrs. Montgomery. She met him in the fall of 2014 at a tech infrastructure conference in San Francisco. Layla was 29 then, a forensic accountant at Vane & Hart, the firm her own father had founded 3 decades earlier. She was good at her job, better than good. She had the kind of mind that saw patterns in spreadsheets the way other people saw faces in clouds. Numbers told her stories, and she listened.
Caspian Montgomery was the keynote speaker that year, 34, self-made, already being called the architect of the Pacific Northwest's data revolution. He'd built quantum dynamics from a garage in Bellevue into a server infrastructure empire that powered half the cloud storage on the West Coast. Forbes had just put him on a list, the kind of list that made people return your calls. He found her at the cocktail hour afterward, not by accident. She'd learn that later. Nothing Caspian did was by accident. He asked what she did. She told him. He tilted his head and said, "A forensic accountant, so you're the one companies call when they want to know where the bodies are buried." She'd laughed. He had that effect on people. He didn't just court her, he studied her, learned what she needed to hear, and delivered it flawlessly. Within 6 months, she was wearing his ring. Within a year, she'd left Vane & Hart. Her father had been confused, a little hurt, but Caspian had a way of making things seem reasonable. "Lila's pregnant," he'd said at a family dinner, one hand resting on her shoulder. "She needs rest. She needs to focus on what matters." What mattered, apparently, was being Mrs. Montgomery. The first 2 years weren't bad. They were good, actually. Caspian was attentive, generous, proud of her in public. He bought her a house on Mercer Island with water views and a kitchen bigger than her childhood home. He hired staff so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. He told her she deserved to be taken care of. She told herself she was choosing family. She didn't realize she was being erased. The shift happened slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice. First, it was the finances. Caspian handled everything, the accounts, the investments, the trusts. When she asked to see statements, he smiled and said she didn't need to worry. When she mentioned opening her own account, he looked at her like she'd suggested something absurd. "We're a team," he said. "Why would you need your own account?" Then it was the calendar. Her time became his time. Events, dinners, fundraisers. She was expected to be there, smiling, nodding, playing the role of the brilliant CEO's beautiful wife. When she mentioned wanting to take a class, just something to keep her mind sharp, he sighed and said maybe next quarter. There was always a reason it wasn't the right time. One evening, Early in their 4th year, she noticed a transfer on their shared statement, a large one, 7 figures, moved to an entity she didn't recognize. She asked him about it over dinner. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, his eyes found hers, and for the first time she saw something behind the charm, something cold, something calculating. "Just portfolio movement," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." His smile didn't reach his eyes. She didn't ask again, but she didn't forget either. She filed it away in a part of her mind she'd almost forgotten existed, the part that used to find patterns in spreadsheets, the part that listened when numbers told stories. What Caspian didn't know, what he would never suspect until it was far too late, was that Layla Vane had never stopped being a forensic accountant. She'd just gone quiet. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let's continue. It started as a convenience. Caspian set up a household account for Layla. Groceries, dry cleaning, the children's expenses. He deposited a fixed amount each week, enough to cover necessities, never enough to accumulate. What she didn't know at first was that every transaction triggered a notification on his phone. She found out at a dinner party. One of his business partners mentioned a charity auction, and Layla mentioned she'd donated to the silent bid earlier that week. Caspian's hand found her knee under the table. His grip was firm. His smile never wavered. Later that night, in the privacy of their bedroom, he asked her about the donation, how much, to what cause, why she hadn't mentioned it first. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came before storms. She explained. It was for the children's hospital, $100. She didn't think. "That's the problem," he said. "You didn't think."
He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The disappointment in his tone was surgical. By the time he finished, she felt like a child who'd stolen from a cookie jar. She apologized. He forgave her, and the next week the deposit was smaller. She never donated again without asking first. Rachel Kim had been Layla's closest friend since college. They'd roomed together at Boston University, stayed close through grad school, stood at each other's weddings. Rachel was one of the few people who remembered who Layla was before she became Mrs. Montgomery. Caspian never said he didn't like Rachel. He didn't need to. It started with scheduling conflicts. Every time Layla tried to arrange lunch, something came up. A work event Caspian needed her at, a school function she'd forgotten about, a dinner with investors that couldn't be moved. Then Rachel's calls started going to voicemail. Not always, just often enough. One afternoon, Layla managed to slip away for coffee. She and Rachel sat in a corner booth at a cafe in Capitol Hill, and for an hour, Layla felt like herself again. They laughed about old times. Rachel asked questions about her life, real questions, not the polite surface ones she got at Gallus. "How are you really doing?" Rachel asked, stirring her latte. "I feel like I never see you anymore." Layla opened her mouth to say the usual things. "Fine, busy, you know how it is," but something in Rachel's eyes made her pause. "It's complicated," she said instead. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm here, whenever you're ready to talk." Halfway through their second latte, Caspian walked in. He smiled when he saw them, joined their table like it was the most natural thing in the world, ordered an espresso, and charmed Rachel with questions about her consulting business. "How's the firm doing? Any exciting new clients? You know, I have some contacts who might be perfect for your services." Rachel was flattered. Most people were when Caspian turned his attention on them. He had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room.
When the check came, he insisted on paying. Rachel protested. He waved her off with that easy smile. On the drive home, his demeanor shifted. Not dramatically. He wasn't the type for dramatic shifts. Just a cooling, a stillness. "I didn't know you were meeting Rachel today," he said. "It was last minute. She was in the neighborhood." He was quiet for a moment. Then, casually, "I heard her husband's having some financial troubles. Something about a bad investment. Jason was always a little reckless with money." Layla didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. "I hope they'll be okay," Caspian continued. "It would be a shame if Rachel had to close her firm. She's worked so hard." The words were kind. The tone was not. Rachel never called again. For months, Layla thought it was just busy schedules, different seasons of life, the way friendships sometimes drift. Years later, she would learn the truth. Caspian had reached out to Jason Kim the day after that coffee, told him things about Rachel's behavior, lies wrapped in concern, suggestions about what Rachel might be doing during her lunches with old friends. Seeds planted so carefully that Jason started checking Rachel's phone, questioning her whereabouts, accusing her of things that existed only in Caspian's imagination. The marriage survived, barely, but Rachel withdrew from everyone, stopped trusting her own judgment, stopped reaching out. Caspian had destroyed her closest friendship without raising his voice, without making a single accusation, without leaving any fingerprints. That day, driving home in silence, all Layla knew was that the last person who remembered the old her had just slipped away, and Caspian's hand rested on her knee the whole drive, warm and possessive. After Rachel, Layla tried to maintain other connections. Caspian's sister Miranda seemed like a safe option, family, someone who'd be at holidays anyway. Miranda was different from her brother, softer, more uncertain. She'd never quite lived up to the Montgomery expectations, and it showed in the way she held herself, slightly apologetic, always watching for approval.
The first few lunches went well. Miranda talked about her struggles with her own marriage, her difficulties with their mother, her feeling of never being enough. Layla listened. It felt good to listen to someone else's problems, to feel useful. Then Miranda mentioned something Layla had said, something about feeling isolated to Caspian, not maliciously, just casually, the way families share information. Caspian addressed it that night. He didn't accuse, he expressed concern. "Miranda told me you've been feeling alone," he said, his voice gentle. "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm fine," Layla said. "I was just venting." "You know you can always talk to me, right?" He pulled her close. "We're partners. I hate thinking you're suffering in silence." The next day, Miranda called. She was tearful, apologetic. "I didn't mean to cause problems. Caspian called me this morning. He seemed really worried about you. Maybe you should see someone, a therapist or something." After that, every conversation with Miranda felt monitored. Layla learned to keep things surface level, the weather, the children's activities, safe topics that couldn't be reported back. Another connection, quietly severed. She did try therapy, once. Caspian found a name for her, Dr. Ellen Shaw, highly recommended, very discreet. She sees a lot of executives' wives, he said. She understands the pressures. The first session felt promising. Dr. Shaw had a warm office, a calming voice, an attentive manner. Layla talked about feeling disconnected, about missing her career, about the strange sense that she was disappearing into a role she'd never auditioned for. Dr. Shaw nodded sympathetically, took notes, asked thoughtful questions. At the end of the session, she said, "I think we can really make progress here. I'll send a summary to your husband. He's the one handling the billing, and we can schedule next week." Layla froze. "A summary?" "Just the general themes," Dr. Shaw assured her. "Nothing specific. It's standard practice when a spouse is covering the sessions. He wants to be supportive." Layla didn't go back. She later discovered that Dr. Shaw wasn't just Caspian's recommendation. She was on Quantum's payroll as a consultant, helping executives manage family transitions. Every word Layla said in that warm, safe office had been documented and delivered to her husband within 48 hours. What happened next would change everything, but first, Layla had to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with. Daniel Vane had built his law firm from nothing, started with a card table in a rented office, ended with his name on the door of one of Boston's most respected practices. He was proud, stubborn, and loved his daughter in the way that old-school New England fathers did, fiercely, silently, with a faith that didn't need words. When he got sick, Layla wanted to go to him immediately. It was March of their 6th year. The diagnosis was aggressive. Doctors were talking months, not years. She booked a flight for the next morning. Caspian came home that evening with flowers. She thought he was being supportive. Then he mentioned the investor presentation. "The Singapore group," he said, arranging the roses in a vase she'd never liked. "They're flying in specifically to meet us, both of us." She explained about her father, the diagnosis, the urgency. Caspian nodded sympathetically. Of course, but the Singapore meeting was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the foundation of Quantum's Asian expansion, and they specifically asked about his family. They wanted to see stability, commitment, the whole package. "1 week," he said, "just push the trip 1 week. Your father will understand. He's a businessman." She pushed the trip. Her father died 3 weeks later. She wasn't there.
She was at a gala in Seattle, wearing a dress Caspian had chosen, smiling to strangers who would never know her name. She stood in the bathroom that night, gripping the sink, staring at her reflection until her knuckles turned white. Something inside her cracked, not broke, cracked, a fissure that would widen over time. But on the surface, nothing showed. She walked back out, took Caspian's arm, and smiled for the cameras.
What he had broken inside her would eventually become the foundation of something else entirely. The Quantum Dynamics Annual Gala was the social event of Seattle's tech calendar. 2,000 guests, a venue that overlooked the sound, the kind of party where deals were made between champagne toasts and donations were measured in 7 figures. Layla stood beside Caspian as he worked the room. She'd done this dozens of times before. Smile, nod, laugh at the right moments, disappear into the background when the real conversation started. She'd learned the choreography by heart. Stand slightly behind him, let him introduce you, then fade. Don't offer opinions unless directly asked, and even then keep it light. Men like you agreeable, not interesting. But this night was different. This night she noticed Serafina Vale. Serafina was new, late 20s, immaculately dressed in a deep burgundy gown that somehow managed to be both professional and provocative. She was introduced as a PR consultant Quantum had recently brought on to manage their expansion messaging. She had the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly where she stood and exactly whose attention she had. Layla watched them from across the room, the way Serafina touched Caspian's arm when she laughed, the way he leaned in when she spoke, closer than he leaned for anyone else, the way his hand found the small of her back, a gesture so familiar, so intimate, it made Layla's stomach turn. She knew that gesture. He'd used it on her once, back when she was still someone he wanted to possess rather than someone he'd already acquired. Later, during the silent auction, one of Caspian's partners introduced Layla to a group of investors. "This is Caspian's wife," he said, gesturing at her like she was part of the venue decor. "She used to work in accounting. Can you believe it?" The laughter was polite, dismissive, the kind of laughter reserved for pleasant surprises that don't actually matter. A housewife with a history, how quaint. One of the investors, an older man with kind eyes, tried to engage her. What kind of accounting? He seemed genuinely curious. Before Layla could answer, Caspian appeared at her elbow.
"Forensic accounting," he said, squeezing her shoulder a beat too hard. She was quite good, actually, but she found her true calling in motherhood. He smiled at the group. "Some women are just meant to nurture." The older investor nodded politely. The others had already lost interest. Layla smiled. Her jaw ached from the effort. Her fingers dug into her palm hard enough to leave marks. Across the room, Caspian whispered something in Serafina's ear. Serafina threw her head back and laughed. The real kind, not the polite kind. The kind of laugh Layla used to have before she learned to moderate everything she did. She excused herself to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, pressed her forehead against the cool door, and counted her breaths until her hand stopped shaking. She didn't confront him that night. She didn't make a scene. When she emerged, her makeup was perfect, her smile was in place, and she took Caspian's arm like nothing had happened. But later, after the guests were gone and Caspian was snoring beside her, she went to her closet. In the back, behind old shoe boxes and forgotten handbags, she kept a notebook, plain, black, unremarkable. She opened it and wrote down everything she'd observed, the body language, the timeline, the way other people in the room had looked at Caspian and Serafina, the knowing glances, the raised eyebrows. She didn't know Serafina's full role yet, but she would. In time, she'd know everything. The worst part? This was only the beginning. Caspian was obsessed with automation. The house on Mercer Island was a showcase of smart technology, voice-controlled lights, AI-managed thermostats, a security system that could track a housefly from the front door to the kitchen. The crown jewel was the refrigerator, a custom-built unit synced directly to Quantum servers. Caspian wanted to be able to check the grocery list, from his office, from Tokyo, from anywhere in the world. He joked about it at parties. "My fridge knows more about my family's eating habits than my wife does." What he forgot was that the sink worked both ways.
It was 2 in the morning when Layla found it. She couldn't sleep. The anniversary of her father's death was approaching, and the nights had become difficult. She went downstairs for water and noticed the refrigerator's display screen was active. She had never paid much attention to it before, just another gadget,
another piece of the elaborate life Caspian had constructed around her. But that night, something made her look closer. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the forensic accountant inside her, the one she'd buried but never killed, finally waking up. There was a folder icon she didn't recognize. It was labeled simply Sync Archive. She tapped it. The screen filled with documents, hundreds of them, memos, spreadsheets, names of companies she'd never heard of, transfer records with amounts that made her breath catch. She stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m., the refrigerator light casting shadows on her face, reading documents that would end her husband's empire. Apex Logistics, Cascade Holdings, Meridian Ventures, North Star Capital Partners, shell companies layered like Russian dolls, all traced back to quantum dynamics through threads so thin that normal auditors would never find them. But Layla wasn't a normal auditor. She was a forensic accountant who'd spent a decade finding hidden patterns, and these patterns screamed. She started with Apex Logistics, registered in Delaware, single shareholder, Marcus Webb, Quantum CFO, registered agent address, 4847 Lakewood Drive, Bellevue. A quick property record search on her phone confirmed her suspicion. That address belonged to Webb's mother. A company with no employees, no physical presence, and no documented services rendered had received $14 million from Quantum over 5 years. The invoices listed consulting services and logistics optimization. The money had flowed out to offshore accounts within days of each deposit. Then there was Cascade Holdings. On paper, it managed real estate investments for Quantum's employee pension fund. In reality, it was buying properties at inflated prices from entities connected to Seattle city officials, the same officials who approved Quantum's server farm permits.
The third company was different. Meridian Ventures was the one that made her blood run cold. Meridian's primary purpose seemed to be holding assets, specifically assets that would be difficult to trace. Art, cryptocurrency, bearer shares in foreign companies, and the sole authorized signatory on every Meridian document was Serafina Vale. Caspian hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been building a financial escape hatch with his mistress's name on every door. If investigators ever came knocking, the trail would lead to Serafina, a young PR consultant in over her head, a convenient scapegoat, the kind of fall guy who'd take 15 years in federal prison while Caspian walked away clean. Layla photographed everything, page after page, document after document, her phone's camera clicking in the silent kitchen. She uploaded the images to an encrypted cloud server she'd set up months earlier, just in case, she'd told herself then. Just in case of what? She hadn't known. Now she knew. She didn't know exactly what she was building yet, but she knew she was building something, and she knew she had to be patient. For 3 years, she watched, she documented, she waited. Every time Caspian synced new documents to the refrigerator, she reviewed them. Every time a new shell company appeared, she traced its connections. Every time money moved, she followed it. And Caspian never suspected that his downfall was humming softly in the kitchen, keeping the milk cold. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. It took 18 months to understand Serafina's full role. She wasn't just a mistress, she was a mechanism. Layla traced the shell companies backward, following the money through offshore accounts and domestic holdings. The pattern was elegant, she had to admit. Caspian was laundering funds through Quantum's expansion projects, disguising bribes to licensing officials as consulting fees, funneling kickbacks through entities that existed only on paper. And every single one of those entities was registered in Serafina Vale's name. It was brilliant in a cruel way. If anyone ever came looking, the trail would lead to Serafina, a young PR consultant in over her head, a convenient scapegoat, the kind of fall guy who'd take 15 years in federal prison while Caspian walked away clean.
Layla wondered if Serafina knew. Probably not. Caspian was careful. He'd have told her it was normal business structure, tax efficiency, nothing to worry about. The same lies he'd told Layla for years. She filed this away too, another piece of the puzzle, another thread she'd pull when the time was right. But that time wasn't now, not yet. She needed more, and she needed something else, something Caspian would never see coming. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Caspian's voice was tight when he told her to come to his study. Not angry, controlled. The kind of controlled that meant he was holding something back. She found him standing behind his desk, a tablet in his hand. His eyes were dark. "You've been talking to someone," he said. Her heart stopped, but her face stayed still. Years of practice. "I don't know what you mean." He set the tablet down, turned it toward her. On the screen was a log of outgoing calls from the landline, a Boston number, multiple entries over the past month. "Harrison Blackwell," Caspian said. "Your father's old partner, one of the best divorce attorneys on the East Coast. You've called him 6 times. Layla's mind raced. She'd been careful, used the landline because she knew he monitored her cell. She didn't think he'd check the house phone. "He was my father's friend," she said. "I was asking about his estate." Caspian's smile was cold. "Don't lie to me, Layla. You've never been good at it." He moved around the desk, slow, deliberate, each step measured. "You want to leave me," he said. "Fine, try, but let me tell you what happens next." He described it calmly, like he was explaining a business plan. His attorneys would bury her. She'd lose the children. He knew people, he knew resources she couldn't imagine. She was a housewife with no income, no career, no standing. She'd be lucky to get visitation. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came before someone destroyed everything you loved.
"And if you think you can use anything you found against me," he continued, "think again. I know what you've been doing. I know about your little cloud folder. Try to use it, and I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage. You'll spend the next decade in court just fighting to stay out of prison." He was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "So here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to forget whatever plan you've been cooking up. You're going to smile. You're going to be the wife I need you to be, and we're going to continue exactly as we have been. Do you understand?" Layla looked at her husband, at the face she'd once loved, at the man who'd spent 9 years dismantling her piece by piece. "Yes," she said, "I understand." Caspian's expression softened. He kissed her forehead like she was a child who'd learned her lesson. "Good," he said. "I'm glad we could talk." He walked out of the study, already checking his phone, already moving on to the next thing. He thought he'd won. He thought the tremor in her voice was surrender. He was wrong. That night, after Caspian fell asleep, Layla went downstairs. She opened the refrigerator, accessed the hidden folder, and began uploading everything to a new server, one she'd set up that afternoon, routed through 3 different countries, encrypted with protocols Caspian's IT team had never heard of. She didn't stop until dawn. He saw a wife backing down. He didn't see a forensic accountant activating Phase 2. In the weeks that followed, Layla became the perfect wife. She smiled more, complained less, attended every event on Caspian's arm without protest. She complimented his suits, laughed at his jokes, deferred to his opinions in public. She was warm in bed and quiet at breakfast and invisible when he needed her to be. Caspian noticed the change. He mentioned it to Alistair during a lunch meeting. "She finally understands her place," he said. "Sometimes people just need a reminder of reality." He had no idea how right he was. While he celebrated his victory, Layla worked in silence.
The first step was organization. She created a system, color-coded, cross-referenced, meticulously documented. Every shell company got its own file. Every transaction was logged with dates, amounts, and connected parties. She built a timeline stretching back 6 years, showing the exact evolution of Caspian's corruption. She mapped every entity connected to quantum dynamics, cross-referenced board members with property records, donation histories, and licensing approvals. She identified the CFO's mother's address, the same address listed for Apex Logistics' registered agent. She found the city officials who'd approved permits for server farms that violated environmental regulations. She traced the bribes through 3 layers of shell companies and back again. Most importantly, she understood the architecture. Caspian wasn't just stealing money, he was building a machine, a system designed to funnel wealth out of quantum while leaving someone else holding the bag when it all collapsed. And that someone was Serafina Vale.
She discovered that Serafina was more than a mistress and more than a scapegoat. She was unknowingly carrying all the legal liability for 12 years of financial crimes. Her signature appeared on 47 documents. Her name was attached to accounts holding over $60 million in misappropriated funds. If investigators ever came knocking, Serafina would face federal charges that could put her away until she was 50. Caspian would express shock and disappointment. His attorneys would distance him from the rogue consultant who'd abused his trust, and life would go on. Unless someone warned her first. Layla arranged a meeting, neutral ground, a coffee shop in Tacoma, far enough from Seattle that neither of them would be recognized. The morning of, she almost didn't go. She sat in her car outside the cafe for 20 minutes, hands shaking, second-guessing everything. Serafina was her husband's mistress, the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage, the woman who'd laughed at Caspian's jokes while Layla stood invisible in the corner. But she wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing this because she needed Serafina's cooperation, and because, despite everything, she couldn't watch another woman be destroyed by Caspian Montgomery.
Serafina arrived defensive, suspicious, ready for confrontation. She was dressed impeccably as always, but there were shadows under her eyes. The strain was showing. "You're his wife," Serafina said, not sitting down. "Why would you want to talk to me?" "Because you're in danger," Layla replied, "and I don't think you know it." She laid out the evidence on the table between them, the shell companies, the signatures, the money trail that ended with Serafina's name on every incriminating document, the federal statutes that applied, the projected sentence. 15 years, Layla said, maybe more. That's what you're looking at if this goes sideways. Serafina's face went pale. She picked up the documents with trembling hands. "He told me this was normal," Serafina whispered. "Business structure, tax efficiency. He said I was being paranoid when I asked questions." "He told you what he tells everyone, what he needs you to believe." 2 hours later, Serafina left with a folder full of documents and a choice to make. Layla didn't threaten her, didn't guilt her, just showed her the truth, the paper trail that ended with her name on every incriminating document, the projected sentence, the fact that Caspian had already consulted with attorneys about how to distance himself if things went wrong. She also showed her something else, a way out, immunity in exchange for testimony, protection for herself, and, here Layla paused, reading Serafina's face, for anyone else who might be affected. Serafina's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Caspian, especially not Caspian. But Layla had noticed. She'd been watching for months. The subtle changes in posture, the way Serafina's hand drifted to her midsection during moments of stress, the morning when Serafina had excused herself from a company brunch looking green. Patterns were her specialty.
"You're going to be a mother," Layla said quietly. "Do you want your child born while you're in federal custody? Do you want them to grow up visiting you through glass?" Serafina didn't answer. She didn't have to. The terror in her eyes said everything. 2 weeks later, Serafina agreed to cooperate. That decision would cost Caspian everything. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday afternoon. The children's school had organized a field trip, a 3-day camping trip to Olympic National Park. Both parents' signatures were required on the permission slip and liability waiver. Caspian was buried in work. The Singapore deal was in its final stages, months of negotiation coming down to a few critical days. A hostile acquisition was in play. His attention was fractured across a dozen crises. His assistant sent the DocuSign link to Layla with instructions. Get his signature. Make it quick. He doesn't have time for this. Normally, Caspian would review everything before signing. He was meticulous about documents, professionally at least. He trained his team to never put anything in front of him without a summary. But family paperwork was different. That was Layla's domain. That was beneath his attention. When Layla received the PDF, she studied it carefully. Then she made some modifications. She didn't change the visible content. The permission slip still looked exactly like a permission slip. The liability waiver still read like a liability waiver. What she changed were the metadata fields, the hidden information embedded in every PDF file. And she added an attachment, a 16-page document that appeared to be part of the school's standard paperwork. In reality, it was a limited power of attorney, valid for 48 hours, granting Layla full authority over all jointly held accounts and assets. She sent the DocuSign link to Caspian's assistant with a note. Urgent, needs his signature by EOD for the field trip deadline. 20 minutes later, the notification came through. Caspian had signed. He clicked approve without reading. The signature that was supposed to send his son on a field trip had just signed away his empire.
Layla's hands were shaking when she saw the confirmation. This was the point of no return. Everything that came next depended on the next 48 hours. She moved fast. First, she accessed the hidden accounts, the ones she'd mapped over 3 years of watching. $38 million in liquid assets spread across 4 jurisdictions, all connected through shell companies that Caspian thought no one knew about. Using the power of attorney, she transferred everything to a court-supervised custodial fund. Every movement was documented. Every transfer was logged with timestamps and reference numbers. She wasn't stealing his money, she was securing it for the divorce proceedings he didn't know were coming. By the time the 48 hours expired, the money was locked, safe, beyond Caspian's reach. The day she filed for divorce, Caspian was in Tokyo closing the Singapore deal. He was at a celebration dinner surrounded by executives and champagne when the process server found him. His attorney called him 11 times that night. He didn't answer any of them. He was too busy staring at the documents in his hand, trying to understand how his perfect life had just detonated. She didn't know it yet, but someone was watching, someone who would make this much more complicated before it was over. We're back in the courtroom now, King County's Superior Court. The same marble floors, the same fluorescent lights, the same court reporter with the same impassive expression. But everything is different. Caspian Montgomery sits behind his wall of lawyers, but the smirk is gone. His tie is slightly loosened, a detail so small it would be invisible to anyone who didn't know him, but Layla knew him. She knew that loosened tie meant he'd been tugging at it, nervous, unsettled. He'd seen the discovery documents. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. His eyes kept darting to the door, to his phone, to Layla. Each time they landed on her, they slid away again, like looking at her directly might make what was about to happen real. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Montgomery, you may proceed with your opening statement."
Layla stood. Her hands were steady now. The trembling from the first day was gone. "Thank you, Your Honor. Before I begin, I'd like to clarify something for the record." She paused, let the silence build. "Montgomery is my married name. My maiden name is Vain, V-A-I-N, as in Vain and Hart, the law firm currently representing my husband in this proceeding." The murmur that rippled through the courtroom was audible. Several people in the gallery turned to look at Alistair Davis, whose face had gone the color of old paper. "My father, Daniel Vain, founded that firm 32 years ago," Layla continued. "I grew up in those offices. I spent summers filing briefs and organizing case documents while other kids were at camp. I know your billing codes, Mr. Davis. I know your settlement strategies. I know the names of your senior partners and the cases that made your reputation." Alistair was on his feet, but Judge Harrison waved him down. "And before I became Mrs. Montgomery," Layla said, "I was a licensed forensic accountant with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My specialty was detecting financial fraud in corporate environments. I spent 4 years at my father's firm doing exactly that before I met my husband." She turned to face Caspian directly. "I haven't worked professionally in 9 years, but I never stopped paying attention." Caspian's laugh died in his throat. The sound that came out instead was something between a cough and a gasp. For the first time in their marriage, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Layla's first witness was Marcus Webb, CFO of Quantum Dynamics for the past 7 years. Webb took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd never been caught at anything. His suit cost more than most people's cars. His watch cost more than most people's houses. He had the easy manner of someone who believed money could solve any problem. That belief was about to be tested. "Mr. Webb," Layla began, positioning herself so the jury could see both their faces, "are you familiar with an entity called Apex Logistics?" Webb's confidence flickered, just for a moment, just enough for Layla to notice. "Of course," he said smoothly. "It's a vendor we've worked with for several years." "Can you describe what services Apex Logistics provides to Quantum Dynamics?" "Various consulting services, logistics optimization, supply chain analysis." "I see." Layla pulled a document from her folder.
This is a copy of Apex Logistics business registration filed with the Delaware Secretary of State. Can you read the registered agent address for the court?" Webb took the document. His eyes scanned it. His face went gray. That appears to be a residential address." "It is," Layla confirmed. "Specifically, it's 4847 Lakewood Drive, Bellevue, Washington. According to King County property records, that address belongs to Martha Webb, your mother." The courtroom went still. "For the record," Layla continued, "Apex Logistics has received $14.3 million from Quantum Dynamics over the past 5 years. The company has no employees, no physical office, no equipment, no documented deliverables of any kind." She let that sink in. "Would you like to explain what that money was actually for, Mr. Webb?" Webb's mouth opened, closed. His eyes found Caspian across the courtroom. Caspian looked away. I'd like to consult with my attorney." "I'm sure you would," Layla said, "but I'm not finished." She produced another stack of documents. "These are wire transfer records showing that within 72 hours of each payment to Apex Logistics, equivalent amounts, minus a 10% fee, were transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg." "Objection!" Alistair was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is—" "Overruled." Judge Harrison's voice was sharp. "Sit down, Mr. Davis." "The accounts," Layla continued, "are controlled by shell companies whose beneficial owners include current and former Seattle City officials who, coincidentally, approved every permit Quantum Dynamics applied for over the past 6 years, including permits for server farms that violated EPA environmental guidelines."
Webb was sweating now, visible beads on his forehead. "Would you like to explain that, Mr. Webb, or should I continue?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to, but the CFO was just the appetizer. The main course was about to walk through the door. When the courtroom doors opened, every head turned. Serafina Vale walked down the center aisle slowly, deliberately. She was visibly pregnant now, 5 months along, her condition impossible to hide beneath her conservative navy dress. She moved with careful dignity, one hand resting on her stomach, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't look at Caspian as she passed him. She didn't need to. His face said everything. He'd gone white, not pale, white, the color of someone who'd just seen a ghost, or worse, someone who'd just seen their future collapse in real time. Serafina took her place on the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in. She sat with her hands folded in front of her, calm and composed. "Miss Vale," Layla began gently, "how long have you been employed as a consultant for Quantum Dynamics?" 3 years, Serafina replied. Her voice was steady. "And in that time, were you asked to sign any corporate documents related to subsidiary companies or affiliated entities?" Serafina nodded. "Many documents, dozens probably. Mr. Montgomery told me it was standard procedure. He said I was being listed as a board member on some subsidiary entities for tax efficiency purposes. He said it was a formality." "Did he explain what those entities actually did, how they operated?" "No." She paused. "He said I didn't need to worry about the details. He said he would take care of everything. He said I should trust him." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Layla handed her a stack of documents, each one flagged with colored tabs. "These are registration papers for 12 shell companies created over the past 4 years. Your name appears on all of them as the primary responsible party. Your signature is on the articles of incorporation, the banking resolutions, and the annual compliance filings." Serafina looked at the documents. Her hand trembled slightly. "According to federal prosecutors," Layla continued, "these entities were used to launder approximately $47 million through a network of offshore accounts. The money came from bribes, kickbacks, and misappropriated corporate funds. Were you aware of that?" Serafina's eyes filled with tears. "No, I had no idea. I thought he told me." She stopped, composed herself. "I trusted him," she said. "I believed him when he said it was nothing to worry about." "If convicted on all counts, you could face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Did Mr. Montgomery ever mention that possibility?" Serafina looked at Caspian for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her gaze was steady, clear. "No," she said. "He told me he loved me. He told me we had a future together. He told me the money was our freedom fund, for when he left his wife, for when we could be together openly." She paused, let the words land. He didn't tell me I was the escape plan, the person who'd take the fall if anything went wrong. He didn't tell me he'd already consulted attorneys about how to distance himself if we got caught. Objection! Alistair's voice was strained. Speculation! Judge Harrison considered for a moment. I'll allow it. The witness is describing statements made to her. Continue. Serafina straightened in her chair. He used me, she said, the same way he used his wife, the same way he uses everyone. And when I found out the truth, when someone finally showed me what he'd done, I realized I had a choice. I could go to prison protecting a man who'd set me up to take his fall, or I could tell the truth. She looked at the judge. I'm telling the truth. The courtroom was silent. Caspian stared at the table in front of him. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge. Layla's final exhibit was the one that mattered most. Your Honor, she said, I'd like to present evidence obtained from a device in the Montgomery family home, specifically a Samsung Smart Hub refrigerator connected to Quantum Dynamics' corporate server network. The objection came immediately. Your Honor, Alistair said, this evidence was obtained through unauthorized access to corporate systems. It's inadmissible. The device is a household appliance, Layla interrupted calmly. It sits in my kitchen. I have full access to it as a co-owner of the property. The sync to Quantum servers was configured by Mr.
Montgomery himself, without my knowledge or consent. I simply accessed information that appeared on the screen I look at every morning when I get milk for my coffee. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. You obtained corporate documents from your refrigerator? Yes, Your Honor. My husband's obsession with smart home technology turned out to be rather convenient. A few people in the gallery laughed. Caspian did not. I'll allow it, Judge Harrison said. Proceed. Layla connected a tablet to the courtroom's display system. The screen filled with documents, 3 years' worth, meticulously organized and indexed. These files were automatically synced to the family refrigerator's display system between 2021 and 2024, she explained. They include internal memos, wire transfer authorizations, communications between shell company managers, and documentation of payments to public officials. She highlighted one document after another, walking the court through the architecture of Caspian's corruption, the shell companies, the bribes, the money laundering, the systematic defrauding of Quantum shareholders and employees. By the time she finished, even the court reporter had stopped typing. Everyone was watching the screen. The tech genius, Layla said quietly, had been undone by a kitchen appliance. The back doors of the courtroom opened. 4 men in FBI jackets walked in. They moved with the deliberate calm of people who'd done this many times before. The lead agent approached the defense table. Caspian Montgomery? Caspian didn't respond. He seemed frozen. Mr. Montgomery, I'm Special Agent Torres with the FBI's White Collar Division. You're under arrest for wire fraud, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. He recited the Miranda rights while Caspian stood slowly, his movements mechanical. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Caspian's eyes found Layla's across the courtroom.
For 9 years, he'd looked through her, past her, around her. She'd been furniture, decoration, a possession he'd stopped noticing. Now, finally, he saw her, really saw her, and it was the last thing he'd see before the handcuffs clicked. The text came 3 days after the arrest. Unknown number, 1 sentence. We need to talk about the money. Layla knew who it was before she read the name. Malachi Cross, the shadow behind Quantum's shadow. The man whose capital had fueled Caspian's illegal expansion and whose $38 million was now sitting in a court-supervised account. She agreed to meet. Gasworks Park, midnight. Malachi was older than she'd expected, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had seen things and done things and never lost a minute of sleep over any of it. You've caused me considerable inconvenience, he said. His men stood at a distance, close enough to act, far enough to pretend they weren't there. Your husband owed me a return on that investment, Malachi continued. Now he's in federal custody, the money's frozen, and I'm left holding nothing. That's not acceptable. Layla's hand slipped into her jacket pocket. Her fingers closed around a small device. "I understand your position," she said, "but I should tell you something before you make any decisions." Malachi tilted his head, curious. "This," Layla said, pulling out the device, "is a dead man's switch. It's connected to a server in 3 different countries. If my heart rate drops below a certain threshold, or if I don't enter a code every 12 hours, that server automatically releases a package of files to every major news outlet in the country." She held his gaze. "Those files document every transaction between your organization and Quantum Dynamics, every shell company, every bribe, every body buried under every building you've ever financed." Malachi's expression didn't change, but his men shifted slightly. "You're bluffing," he said. "Maybe," Layla replied, "but can you afford to find out?" The silence stretched. The water of Lake Union lapped against the shore behind them.
Finally, Malachi nodded, slowly. "The debt is paid," he said. "We're done here." He turned and walked away. His men followed. Layla waited until their car disappeared around the bend. Then she leaned against her own car and laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in 9 years. The device in her hand was a garage door opener. The invitation came the following week, handwritten. "Eleanor Montgomery requests your presence at the family estate." Eleanor was Caspian's mother, 83 years old, matriarch of a dynasty that predated Quantum by half a century. Old money, real money, the kind that owned ports and land and politicians. Layla expected hostility. What she found was something else entirely. Eleanor sat in a wingback chair, an oxygen tank beside her, watching Seattle's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. "I've been watching you," she said, "since before the trial, since before any of this." Layla waited. "My son is a fool," Eleanor continued. "Always was. His father spoiled him. I tried to warn them both, but men never listen to old women. They think we're decorative." She turned to look at Layla directly. "You're not decorative," she said. "You're something else entirely, something I haven't seen in this family in 50 years. She reached into a drawer beside her chair and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, heavy gold, engraved with an M that was older than the country. "The Montgomery Trust controls $2.3 billion in assets," Eleanor said. "Real estate, technology, shipping. My son was supposed to inherit it. Instead, he's going to spend the next 15 years in prison." She held out the ring. "I'm dying, Mrs. Montgomery. Or should I call you Miss Vane? Either way, I need someone to protect what my family built. Someone who understands that patience is more valuable than aggression. Someone who knows how to watch and wait and strike when the time is right." Layla looked at the ring, at the old woman, at the city spread out below them. "I have conditions," she said. Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile Layla had seen from a Montgomery. "I would expect nothing less." 6 months later, Layla stood at the window of an office that used to belong to Caspian. The view was the same: Seattle skyline, the sound, the mountains in the distance. Everything else had changed. The criminal connections were gone, purged one by one through a series of quiet conversations and quieter transfers. Malachi Cross had retired to somewhere without extradition treaties. The CFO was cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Serafina had given birth to a healthy daughter and started over in a city where no one knew her name. And Caspian? Caspian was in a federal facility in Oregon, learning what it felt like to be invisible. The children visited him once a month. Layla made sure of that. He was still their father. She wasn't cruel. She was just no longer his. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. "The board meeting is in 10 minutes. She put on her jacket, checked her reflection, walked toward the elevator.
She'd spent 9 years being underestimated, dismissed, erased, and in the end, she hadn't just survived, she'd inherited everything. Some lessons take time. Patience isn't weakness, silence isn't surrender, and the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone stopped watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.